Hi folks, welcome back to another episode of SmugMug Live. This is episode 18. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Alastair Jolly. I'll be your host for the next hour or so with today's guest. If you're new to the channel, thank you so much for joining and watching this next episode. If you have watched previous episodes of SmugMug Live, thank you so much for coming back. I would encourage all of you to hit that subscribe button and make sure you turn on that little bell notification. That way you will be notified every time that we go live and publish a new episode of SmugMug Live. We have today's episode and we have one more episode this week on Thursday, again at 10 a.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. in the UK, 7 p.m. Central European time. We will be live with Jerry Vandervelt from Wild Eye, a great wildlife photographer, and he will be giving us some insight into some of the best places in the world to photograph wildlife photography. But today's episode is very different from wildlife. It is sort of conceptual self-portrait artist Joel Robison. So are you there, Joel?
I'm here, yeah.
Hi, Joel. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Yes. You're safe and sound?
Safe and sound, healthy, everything's good.
Cool, but you're not safe and sound in Canada like you should be, right?
No, I'm definitely not in Canada at the moment.
Where do we find you?
You'll find me right now about half an hour outside of the city of London in England.
Yeah. So did you you're obviously over here quite regular, you know, your partner's over here. So did you get stuck here when the pandemic kicked off?
Yeah, I arrived at the beginning of February when kind of things didn't seem like they were going to go too extreme, and then kind of mid-March realized that I was probably going to be here a little bit longer than I had planned, and I still have about a month and a little bit left before I can get back to Canada, but I can't complain. The weather's nice and I'm safe and sound, so things are good for now.
That's the important thing. And the irony is every time you're in London or I'm in London, we miss each other. And here you are for this extended period in London, and I still can't come catch up with you, which is unfortunate.
It's ridiculous.
At least we get to meet each other in different parts of the world, but
absolutely
not in the UK, hopefully sometime soon. I kind of described you as this conceptual self-portrait artist. Is that how you would describe yourself?
Yeah, I think kind of that conceptual creative artist is definitely a term that I've used to describe myself over the years. It kind of varies, I think, just depending on how I'm feeling about my own work at the time. But conceptual photographer, conceptual artist is definitely kind of the common thread between all the different variations of descriptions I use for myself.
Yeah, I guess they maybe change on a daily basis sometimes, depending on.
Yeah, it depends on what's getting more action, my camera or Photoshop at the time.
I obviously first came across your work on Flickr, somewhere that you're very popular, and I think the first time I came across your work was the little film they made, the weekly Flickr, right?
Yeah, that was it's got to be about 6 years ago, coming on 7 years ago, but I started on Flickr about just over 10 years ago now. It's hard to believe it's been more than a decade, and it was sort of like pre-social media. Flickr was the social media at the time, and I started sharing my work on there, and the community there has always been really, really great and really supportive, and it just started kind of testing the waters and trying new things and putting my work out there, and I made some amazing friends that I'm still best friends with today, and it was just a gateway into a whole different world that I had no idea was even out there, and I haven't stopped since. I've been doing it for, I think it must be like 12 years now, and coming up in a few weeks it'll be 7 years full-time. And really that all comes down to Flickr and kind of the opportunities that came from sharing my work there.
Well, we're very grateful that you share your work there and continue to do so. And you mentioned community. I know you have a huge community that follows you, and we're loving the fact they're tuning in today. Wherever you are in the world, give us a shout out in the comments here on YouTube. We'd love to know where you're joining us from, and say hi to Joel. We will be talking for a little bit more, and then Joel will give us a little demonstration on some of his Photoshop tips and tricks. And while we're doing that, don't hesitate to throw some questions in that chat window, and I will pester him with them at the end. I know you're, as we said, you're stuck in London at the moment. Well, maybe not stuck, but sheltering in London.
Sheltering in place. Yeah.
And you're heading back to Canada in a month or so. But if you hadn't been in London just now, you'd probably just be coming back from Peru, because you do an amazing project over the last few years in Peru, along with some other dear friends of ours, Lizzie Gadd and Lulu Lovering, where you do some charity work in Peru. You want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for the past few years, the group of us have joined an organization based out of Canada called Pure Art, and they've been going for over 10 years now, down to one specific city in Peru, and have really changed the kind of community in this one particular part of the city. And they started building homes for people that were in need, and it evolved into kind of building a medical center, building job training facilities, sponsoring students for school, for university, and every year it just seems to kind of grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And the group of us, Lizzie, Lulu, and myself, and now our friend Whitney, have been going. We had gone 3 years in a row, and this year it was almost like fate, or like something was kind of pulling us back, because the three of us, or four of us, sort of were talking kind of late last year, thinking maybe this year we should take a break, and maybe we can fundraise it better for next year. We're not really in the place to go this year. And there was just something about this year that was kind of saying, like, maybe this year isn't the year to go. And yeah, I feel kind of relieved in a sense that I wasn't there, because the group ended up getting stuck in Peru for quite some time. And I thought, oh my God, that would have been every time we go to Peru, there's always some sort of like something that happens where people are, stranded or lost, or, you're there for longer than you planned. And I just thought, I'm kind of glad that I just heard that kind of nagging voice in the back of my head. So maybe this year is a good year to take a pause. So we're definitely planning on going back and kind of rejoining that group and continuing to do amazing things. They work so hard every year to provide for people, and I know that we've talked about trying to get Flickr and SmugMug involved as well. And yeah, once you start helping people, you realize how easy it is, and then you also realize that you can't stop.
Yeah.
Once you start, you absolutely can't stop. You always see opportunities to help, and I think that that's one thing I learned about being, like you said, being really involved in community, especially online, is once you kind of open that door to helping people or connecting with people, you can't really turn that off. You can't really walk away from that. And so I think we're all really committed on going back and helping and being a part of that community.
Well, I hope you're committed on going back, because, as you said, I was excited to hopefully join you this year. I was, Peru's always been on my bucket list, so hopefully we can make that happen again, and hopefully we can get involved as a brand as well to see what help we can do.
It's such a fun trip, and you get to see in the span of a week, houses being built, and it's not just people going down there and doing all of the work for the people of Peru. It's really hiring local workers. It's training people how to be self-sufficient, which I think is the goal of helping anyone, is that you don't want to do something for someone, you want to do something with someone, and leave that situation with that person having all the skills and resources to be able to do it without help. I think we all want to do things on our own without having to rely on others. And I think that's the amazing thing, is you get to see the students learning, and the students, being proud of going to school, and the people being able to start their own businesses now that they don't have to worry about a home. And I think that's great. I think it's a powerful thing to be involved in.
Absolutely. Do you want to give a shout out once more to the organization you work with?
It's called Pure Art Foundation. So you can find it on Facebook, on Instagram. They have a website, and they have a lot of really amazing programs. It's not just that one program in Peru. They have a lot of different avenues that they help people around the world. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Incredible organization
Definitely.
That you introduced me to them last year, and it's been really, really impressive learning about the work they do. So hopefully we can get back to that once we get to travel again, once it's safe to do so. But for the moment, we're stuck where we are, and it's given us this great opportunity to continue to reach out to our community through this kind of live stream that we're doing. I know many people are doing live streams, and it's a great way that this community that is so tight can stay together. And we've got some wonderful people giving us shout outs from all over the world at the moment. So thank you for those. Keep them coming. Love to hear where people are joining us from today. You mentioned Lizzie Gadd, Lulu. Obviously, I've spoke with them. I would encourage people to go check out the amazing SmugMug film we made with Lizzie Gadd. That was a year ago. I just spoke to Lizzie and messaged her and said, "Hey, can you believe that was a year ago?" Right now, it feels like 10 years ago after, the last few months.
The last few months have been a decade in themselves.
Yeah. So let's get back to you and talk about some more of your work. So conceptual self-portrait artist, how much of it is, you mentioned your title changes some days on whether you're doing photography work or whether you're doing editing and Photoshop work. So how much work typically goes into an image, or are they all heavily Photoshopped?
Some are more than others, for sure. I think it depends on kind of a lot of factors. One of the primary ones is how lazy I'm feeling. I'm pretty highly motivated, but I'm also pretty easily dismayed from going out in not the best weather. So if the weather's not great, then I kind of think, okay, what can I make without having to go outside? But I think it changes, and I think when I first started, it was definitely more of, I would go out every day and I would take my camera and I would shoot something every day and come home and edit it every day. So it was much more of like an evenly half and half. Like everything was pretty evenly balanced. And then I started to kind of learn more techniques and skills in Photoshop, and I realized that I could create things without having necessarily to go out and find the locations. I could build them myself. I could, rely on that other side of art, digital art. And so now it kind of varies. There's some times when I create something and it kind of just plops together in Photoshop, and it almost surprises me how quickly that came together. I was like, I feel like a fraud because that took 20 minutes, and I feel like that should have taken me a lot longer. But I look at it now, it's my job, but it's also something I enjoy doing. And so when I'm in the mood to want to make something, it's like sort of enjoyable time. It's just, I get into it and I listen to music, and I just have no expectations really of what is going to come out at that time. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's the key to doing anything that you're doing creatively, is the first step is to really enjoy what you're doing. If you don't enjoy it, then it's hard to sell it to anyone else. And I think now it's been a good test. When we were in kind of that heavy lockdown period, I was getting pretty desperate of like finding places around the house that like people have seen this part of the house a lot. So I have to try and like Photoshop in some more landscapes. And it was a good test for a few weeks there of like, how good can I stay creative when I can only go outside in this little, 10 by 10 patch of grass. So. Yeah.
While we're talking, I'll maybe pull up your Flickr account and scroll through some images.
Gems.
Yeah. While we're locked down, though, and you're saying you're stuck in this small area, you probably have more skills to make that area look completely different than most of us. Most of us, it will always look like a bedroom or a corner of a house. But for yourself, you can literally open a door to Narnia, right? Sitting in your own house. It's incredible.
There hasn't been really a kind of downward trend in my own level of creativity or my own creative output. I've found it a good way to process everything, and a good way to challenge myself, and a good way to stay connected, like we said.
Yeah. Some great comments coming in here. Lee Corgi says, we're joining from South London. Big fans of Joel and photography.
Yes.
Connor McNeil says, Joel's images are always so inspiring. Thanks, Connor.
It's great to hear from names I recognize.
Yeah. I Create Life says hello from New York City.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to
Hello.
see you all. Hello, everyone. Your images, do they always have Joel in them? Are they always self-portraits?
They started that way because when I first started taking photos, I'm a pretty introverted person, and I'm also very not a perfectionist, but I'm pretty stubborn in the sense that I don't like to show people things unless I feel that I'm doing the best that I can do. And so when I first started taking photos, I had no idea what I was doing. I had never owned a camera. I had taken one high school level 2-week film black and white course, and I told the teacher at the end of it that I hated photography and I would never ever need to know any of this information. And so I had no, understanding of what I was doing with the camera. And so I would go out into the woods. I live in the mountains in Canada, and really lucky to have that there. And I would go out and kind of take photos of everything. And then I realized, like, I have these stories that I would love to draw, but I'm not confident in my drawing, but maybe I can use my camera and Photoshop to put them together in that same way. And it started off that way, of kind of being too shy to ask someone else to be in the photos, because I thought these ideas are kind of strange. And this was before kind of the boom of Flickr and the boom of Instagram, where now I think we are used to seeing people showing all these amazing photos. We don't think twice about, oh, that girl's lit her dress on fire and she's walking down the middle of the road. Like, to me, that feels totally normal now. But at the time, it wasn't quite there yet. And so I relied on myself because I was too shy to ask someone else. And then I started realizing that it was a really powerful way for me to spend time with myself in a really productive way. And I think I had not spent that much time alone, and I had not really spent that much time working on things. And when you're by yourself and you're working on something, you have a lot of time to think. And I would go and walk into the woods to take these photos, and it would take 2 or 3 or 4 hours. And the whole time I would be kind of processing things going on in my life. And it became just like this really powerful alone time of like self-reflection, of coming up with ideas that reflected who I was and reflected how I was feeling or interpreting things going on around me, and presenting something at the end of that, having something to show for it. And just over time, I realized that it has become sort of a visual diary of my own life. And because I've been doing it now for over a decade, I can look back and see like how I've changed physically and how I've changed emotionally and how I've changed, in things that have gone on in my life. And I look at that, and I think that's such a unique thing that not everyone has in their life. Yeah. And I talked to some friends who barely have any photos of themselves, and I think I have a lot, and they're not the most normal photos, but I can remember specific events and specific,
emotions
days
and feelings,
and like the weather, and I can remember sounds, and I can remember how I felt that day. And I think what a powerful way to leave a legacy, in this life, and hopefully in a long time when I'm gone, to have this sort of visual, trail behind me.
And isn't that the beautiful thing about Flickr, is just having this beautiful online gallery that anybody can look at, that we can look at and go back, and as well as posting current stuff, look at all
Absolutely.
that amazing stuff we did early on. We were talking to Brooke Shaden last week, who I know is a dear friend of both of ours, and when SmugMug acquired Flickr, one of the very first projects we did was a little project with Brooke, who was celebrating her 10th anniversary of being on Flickr and being a photographer, and we reimagined that very first image that she had posted, which was on Flickr, which was cool. So maybe we can look at that. You've celebrated that anniversary as well. Maybe we can get you to reimagine your first image.
It would be a choice image, I'm sure. It wouldn't be as epic as Brooks. There was a steep learning curve at the beginning of that.
You're both phenomenal. Right. Lovely chatting with you as always, but I'm sure the people watching are desperate to get some tips and tricks on how you make all these images look as incredible as you do. You have such a wealth of images on your stream. I'm just looking at them just now and sharing them. They're all incredible stories. So We'd love to give us some insight. And you mentioned that we should title this kind of adding depth to your images. And certainly scrolling through these, you can see that there's a very three-dimensional feel to most of Joel's work, and that he has lots of foreground and background interest in his work. So I am going to be quiet for a little bit and let you share your screen.
Yep.
And you can give us some insight into what you do. Let me see.
I think it's shared now.
Yep, that's it. You just hide me.
Perfect.
That would be perfect. Right. And I will just...
I can hear you.
Yeah. I will just move you about a little bit. Cool. All yours.
All good. Okay. Yeah, like you mentioned, one thing that I like to keep consistent in my work is the feeling that the viewer is actually a part of the scene. I like to kind of invite the viewer to not only view the image, but actually feel like they're a part of it and actually feel like they're experiencing it. And I think that that's always been something that I've enjoyed doing in the work that I'm doing. And you can see that like this image is one that I shot earlier this year, created earlier this year, and it has those elements of, you know, the foreground elements that are closer to the edges and closer to the viewer and blurred. And then one that I shot years and years ago, this must be from, you know, 2012 or 2011 maybe, and has that same feel. That's the same elements that are closer to the screen, that are blurred out, that really make you feel immersed into the scene. And that's something that I've tried to be consistent with in a lot of the work that I've been doing, is creating that effect that there is a sense of depth, there is something that's welcoming you in, there is something that makes it feel like this was almost just a past moment in time rather than, you know, a constructed image. And I think that that's always really drawn me into other pieces of work and other forms of art as well, is that really engaging sense of being involved. And when I started photography, or before I started photography, I had always dreamed of being an animator and working, you know, for Disney and creating movies. And I think that I like to think that my images are almost like, you know, you've paused the movie and this is just where the movie has been paused. And if you push play, it would just continue going. And I think that that's why I like to include depth in a lot of my images. And so I'll walk through quite a few of them now and kind of give some insight onto how you can do that yourself.
Awesome.
This is one that I did earlier this year. And like we said, I'm really involved in community, and I run a community on Facebook and on Instagram called Lightbulb Project. And every week we have a theme where we create something from, and the theme for this specific week was adventure. And so I wanted to create something, but I was at the time in Canada, and it was January and it was freezing, and I wasn't about to go outside and try and, you know, force some sort of wintry adventure. So I decided to create this sort of warm jungle atmosphere just from being inside. And you can see if I turn all these layers off as I go, that it's really just built up layers, adding all that depth together. There's a giant frog in there.
There's always a giant frog hidden in Joel's pictures. That's
now people
secret.
are going to be looking for. There's not. But you can see that it's all just levels and layers of elements stacked on top of each other that really help to create that effect that you're actually being sucked into that scene.
Sorry, can we talk about the frog? Why? why is there a frog?
There a giant
was
frog?
that the concept that then changed?
No, I thought, like, I was building everything and I wanted to put in some element of like mystery and sort of, I think I must have watched Jumanji or something before this, and I like the idea of something being abnormally large and, you know, going to the jungle and it being so mysterious that there's something there that no one has ever seen before. And so I tried a few different things. I think I had tried like some giant birds, and I had tried some bugs, and I was like, those aren't that cool. And then I found this image of a frog, and I was like, we'll just tuck that in there. And a lot of people didn't even notice it. I posted a kind of an animation on Instagram, turning off all the layers and turning it back on just to show the process. And a lot of people commented saying, like, I didn't even notice that little frog, the huge frog, until afterwards, because it is sort of like buried underneath there. But it's just that is one way that you can really add depth, and not necessarily visual depth, but sort of that storytelling depth. is to add in elements that maybe not everyone is going to see, but some people will, and they might want to ask you questions about it. And that's one way that you can add a layer of contextual depth to the images that you're sharing. And I like to do that a lot. If you've ever taken a class from me, or I've ever spoken to you about creating work, I always hide Easter eggs or have second meanings behind a lot of the things in the photos that I create. And a lot of people don't even realize that. And I think that is a way that you can add depth to any image, is to really put in things on purpose that you can explain later on. And I think that's a clever way to create work that is much more personal as well. For instance, I'm actually extremely afraid of birds, terrified of birds, and you'll find birds a lot in my photographs, and that's usually as a symbol of fear or apprehension, or that feeling of maybe unease. And in photos, sometimes I'll have it behind me, so I'm running away from fear towards adventure in this case. And so it's a way that you can add depth in a creative way, in a contextual way.
Well, if you're saying there's Easter eggs in all your pictures, what I would encourage everyone is go check out his Flickr account, where you can see those images beautifully large, and hunt for all those Easter eggs, and
there's a lot.
Put some comments in there about the Easter eggs. That'd be fun.
There's a lot. I love it when people find them like a long time after, or like they're looking for them for so long that it's like they can't figure out where it is, and it's really kind of driving them mad. Once I made one, and it was like a Harry Potter themed image, and I put in the clouds like a giant face of Voldemort, and I said, has anyone seen what I've hidden in this image? And nobody found it. And I was like, I can't unsee it. It's the only thing I see. Nobody found it. It was like years before anyone commented. But again, here's another image that was created a few months ago. And if I turn off some of these layers, you can see that by adding in some elements on the edges and in the kind of in that foreground effect, it really adds to the feeling that you're involved in the scene. One kind of technique or style that I like to use a lot of in my images is the sort of miniature version of myself. And I don't know why I started doing this. I think as a kid, there was like that film, The Borrowers, and I was really obsessed with that idea of like being really, really tiny. And I loved it. And like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and like those movies where like everything was blown out of proportion. It just like, I loved that concept of there could be tiny, tiny, tiny little people running around our world, and we have no idea. And I still love to create with that theme. And so one thing to think about is, if you're creating a new world, or if you're creating a new perspective, is to really build that up and immerse people into it. So one way to do that is by adding in sort of elements on the side here. And how I did that is just by using images. So you can use, I shoot a lot of my own stock. You can find stock on Adobe Stock or other stock websites. You can use elements and put them into your scene to help build that effect. So here we can just paste this kind of, bluebell layer on top. Push it to the side, and then just simply using the regular Gaussian blur, just blurring it to the side. And what you can see that does is it really helps to make it feel like the viewer has almost pushed aside these little bluebells to find the scene happening in front of them. And I think that's something that I do a lot of in my work, is playing around with that idea that the viewer has simply just kind of stumbled upon something interesting happening. And by simply just making an object a lot larger, pushing it to the side and blurring it, it gives that perspective, that depth, that kind of layers of interest into the image. And I think that's something that I do a lot of in my work.
Something I'd like to mention is, if people are interested in getting stock or getting these type of images, don't forget on the Flickr platform, a little plug for ourselves here, is the whole Creative Commons community on Flickr, where you can use images that are freely available on Flickr, as long as the license is the right Creative Commons license. You can use that in your own artwork. It's a great source.
I've definitely relied on that a few times, looking for specific backgrounds or looking for specific locations, or if I'm trying to find, I need to find a steam train and I can't find one for the right angle that I need. There's been times when Flickr's been the only place that has what I need. And I think that's great that people, are willing to be a part of the creative community and share their images in that way.
Absolutely. A few comments coming in saying our friend Sarah J Photography. I'll pull it up. She says, "You're so crazy fast in Photoshop. I love watching you work." And it's true. You made that bluebell appear and look normal while we were talking. We'd all be struggling doing that. So.
It's pretty. I can walk through it again if it's. I tend to go quite quickly because I think once you get the hang of something, it's like playing the guitar. It's like
I'm being the gatekeeper. Being the gatekeeper and saying, whoa, slow down. We want to know exactly how you did that.
So simply just copying it. So this is a PNG file, so it's transparent in the background, but you could easily just paste in. What I like to do if I'm shooting images where I might need some stock is just bring along a piece of white card, thick white card. It could be from a cardboard box or any kind of white background. And then you can just create your own stock library on the go. So in cases where maybe I'm out somewhere and there is some flowers or leaves or something that I want to keep, I can just take some simple background shots or simple stock photo shots and then come home and kind of turn them into transparencies if I need to. In this case, just like I said, pasting it right into this layer. I'll try and go really super slow. Just increasing the size, so holding down the little corner box and the shift key is going to help make it so it doesn't distort the shape. And then what I always do in the case when I'm trying to add depth by adding these elements is I always push it to the side and I make sure that parts of it are cut off, because that idea of layering on top of each other means that you're not going to see all parts of it, and that helps make it look much more realistic. So pushing it to the side, making sure parts of it are cut off is going to help. Then it's just the filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. And then it just depends on your own image how you're going to, the level or the amount of blur that you're going to use. And you could even use the same technique, and I'll show you in a second perhaps. If you had even portraits or even landscape photos, you can use the same technique. So maybe you have a landscape photo and you feel like, oh, maybe I want to add some cool depth to this. You could do the same thing with, some images of trees or images of flowers. You can kind of create that fake sense of depth by adding these elements in and kind of creating that idea that the viewer is really immersed into that feeling. I usually just play around with the hue and saturation just to kind of help match it. It doesn't take too long in the sense of like these flowers are pretty close to the same color. Anyway.
Just matching it into those existing elements that are already
exactly,
in there.
Yeah. You want to just make it look normal, and you could always, if you wanted to, go in and kind of dodge and burn and play around with it even more. But I don't think you need to in this case. It just helps to make it look really immersive. So you can see that I've added in quite a lot of those bluebells on the sides and on the bottom, just to help that effect really stand out. And the same thing in this image. So this image was themed around social distancing, and the idea.
How appropriate.
I was like, okay, how are we going to do this? I always try to make my work feel positive or uplifting, even if it focuses on difficult themes. And so the final image of this is kind of a paper airplane with a heart coming out of the kind of smoke behind it, or the whatever they call them, coming out of the back of a plane. But I wanted it to look more interesting. I am a fan of negative space, but I also feel like sometimes it lacks something for me. I feel like it's not as exciting as it could be. And so I could have left it simple like this and have it just a lot of negative space, and it's quite powerful. But I like the feeling of like all these extra ladders of like all these other people that have to be separated, or, everyone's quite spaced apart, and I'm on my little ladder and people have to climb up to their little ladders to see me and all these things. And so that's simply exactly what I did. I just had this little wooden ladder that I bought on Amazon that's like 4 inches tall, and I just went out and I photographed it in all different angles and just photoshopped it in on all these different perspectives and added them in, and did the same thing as with the bluebells, just adjusting the levels of blur just to give some different layers. So you can see as I turn these back on, it's the same ladder, and it's just different levels of that Gaussian blur that's helping it have that different level of focus and kind of layers of depth. And I find as you bring things closer to the edge of the frame, the colors are more desaturated and the tones are a bit darker as well. Because if you think about, sometimes it helps actually put something in front of you, you'll notice that like you lose a lot of the detail around the image in front of you. And so you kind of take away the color, take away the light, and it really helps to draw the viewer into the image. And so I did the same thing here, just adding in these extra elements, blurring them, and really helping to draw the viewer's eye into the rest of the image there. You could have it simple and just on its own, but I feel like the message of social distancing and being apart, even though you can see other people, is a lot more powerful in this case, having all these extra elements.
I've got a question for you on that one. Do you mentioned in one of the versions of the image that you added a little paper plane with a vapor trail?
Yeah.
Do you do any actual drawing in Photoshop? Like, do you draw the vapor trails or draw smoke or any type of stuff?
Yeah. I try to rely mostly on myself, and so one thing that I love to do is create custom brushes. I am like, Photoshop brushes are my number one tool in Photoshop. I probably have a library of thousands of brushes, one for every possible thing you can imagine, but they're really fun to be able to use, and brushes are incredibly customizable, so you can use them for so many things, and I feel like it really is an interesting way to kind of add the elements you need in a really personal way. And so in that case, I had a brush that I'd created from actually a cloud, and I used it to kind of make that shape of the smoke trail or the plane trail or whatever it is. But I do like to add in a lot of the elements that I know how to do, and I think that's the kind of joy of spending so much time in Photoshop over the years, is that you kind of start to learn the ins and outs. But I mean, there's things that I'm still learning now and that I had no idea how to do, and I think that is also the joy about technology, is that it's ever evolving and that you'll never catch up. And it's exciting. It's exciting to know that you can always keep doing things and learning things and trying things. So this is another image where this was shot in the back garden in a very unphotogenic location in this kind of patch of grass. And I was like, there's a hedge behind here. And I was like, it looks okay, but it looks like it's kind of boring still. And I don't know how to really add anything. And I tried playing with colors, and I tried playing with different things to try and make it a little more interesting. And then I just simply added in this image on top as a new layer. And all that is a photograph of the exact same spot, just later on in the day when the sun was shining through the hedge, and it creates that nice soft, like creamy bokeh feeling that everyone loves, that nice kind of soft light effect. And I found that really helped add some dimension to the scene and add some visual kind of stimulation to the scene, if you will. And that's something that's really easy to do. So if your background, if you feel like it's lacking, is to add a point of light, or add a point of color, or add a point of contrast. And it's something that it was literally one click. It's just that layer on the light and blending mode, and then just using a layer mask to mask out some of the effect on the bottom there. That's all I did to kind of add a little bit of drama, add a little bit of light, and it helped me to kind of create a much more dynamic scene. And it was interesting, it's when I posted this on Instagram, a lot of the comments, even though nobody knew that I had added that in after the fact, a lot of the comments were about how people liked that kind of glowing light, or that creamy light, or that soft bokeh in the background. And I was like, well, I added it in afterwards. But it's a way that you can add that layer of depth and add kind of that layer of interaction and a little bit more realism as well.
Isn't it just that you have that super expensive $10,000 lens that gives you that beautiful bokeh? That's
yeah, this one was not. It was, my lens is not that much. But you can also use the same technique, like I was saying, in landscape photos or in portrait photos. So here's a portrait that was actually taken last year with our friend Lizzie Gadd. This is the Canadian Rockies, and you could use the same technique as I showed before, adding those elements to the side, just create some depth. So we have the same, this is something I grabbed offline, online, is like a PNG of a Christmas tree. But you could use that same technique of just pasting it in and bringing it to the sides and blurring it just to give it a little bit more like you're spying on someone. I don't know if that's legal. But just that feeling of depth, and again, just playing with the color tones, just matching, where those colors should be in relation to the rest of the image. But it's just another way that you can add a little bit more dimension to even a landscape photo. Obviously, this image is quite nice as it is, but it's just one way that you can kind of frame it differently or add a little bit more dimension or a little bit more interest without it looking too unnatural. There's been times when I feel like I've taken a really nice photo, but it's lacking something. It's lacking like just a little bit of color or a little bit of something, and I've added in maybe some flowers or added in some things on the border, and it just helps to kind of draw the eye in just a little bit more. I'm not a landscape photographer, but I find that like sometimes it's nice to add in a little bit of extra something to your images.
You got to say adding in a happy little tree, right?
Happy little tree.
Happy little tree.
My Bob Ross here. And another thing that you can do. Here's another case of like not knowing where to take an image and then it being pretty simple once I figured it out. So I've created this image of, I am a huge drinker of coffee. I'm trying to find the right way to term that.
Coffeeholic.
Yes. So it kind of fuels everything in my life. And so this was sort of inspired by the idea of like what it feels like when you don't have any coffee or when you've run out of coffee and there's like the ghost of coffee past.
Can you zoom in on that a little bit for us?
Yeah. So this all kind of hand drawn with, again, with a smoke brush. So smoke that I photographed a piece of incense on a black backdrop and then just created a whole series of brushes and then just kind of played with them. It's I have a tutorial, I think on YouTube actually, on how to create a smoke dragon. So if you look that up, you can probably find it. It's not that difficult, but this is kind of where I ended up, and I was like, well, it's okay that it's missing something. Like I need something a little bit more interesting. And one thing that I wanted to do is just sort of add a little bit more of that kind of color or interesting light. So I added a little bit of that bokeh effect. But one thing that you can do is you can make a flattened version of all of your layers, which is if you hold down Control or Command Alt, Shift, and E all at the same time. It's a lot of buttons to press at the same time.
Say those again.
Alt, Control, or Command, Shift, and E. It's like if you're playing piano all at the same time. It creates sort of like this compressed layer of all of the layers that are underneath it. That way you can kind of do whatever you want without damaging any of the layers behind. But in this case, what I'm going to do is take that layer and I'm going to go up into Filter, and underneath here, underneath the blur is this blur gallery, and I'm going to use the path blur. And I just started really playing around with the blur gallery. It's probably been there for years and years and years, but I've never noticed it. You can create sort of like this blur that follows the path that you create. And so if I create this sort of like arced shape, and then over here on the right, you can adjust the speed. If I really increase the speed, it creates this really weird like spiral effect. You can see that it looks kind of strange. Mm-hmm. And then if I click OK, it looks odd right now, but it'll take a second because I think this image is pretty big. What it's going to do is it's going to give us an opportunity to make almost like a motion blur, but it's almost like a ghosted motion blur. So it's another way that you can add a little bit of movement or a little bit of interest to an image without having to do a whole lot. You've done all the work to create the image. This is just a way that you can use what you've already done to add a little bit more interest or intrigue. I'm actually just gonna, if it'll, this is gonna beep at me.
The joys of demoing live on the air with big files.
I have no patience either, so I'm the type of person that will click a button 100 times waiting for it and then wonder why, it crashed.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with my son about that very thing. He's like, this won't open, this won't open. I was like, well, now you've asked it to open like 50 times. It's not going to be happy when eventually it wakes up.
Yeah, I'm the same. Like I'll just kind of keep clicking and clicking and clicking and then get mad when it actually does what I want to do 50 times. Like, no, I don't want 500 of those. I want
But you
one
asked me
quickly.
to.
And of course, now that I've opened all of these folders, it'll be crazy. But I think what I try to do now when I'm editing, when I was first getting going, I was doing like the 365 project, which was huge on Flickr at the time. And there's literally no time to even second guess your editing choices.
Yeah.
Like, you're creating every day, and I was working a full-time job, so I literally had 4 or 5 hours a day to go out and shoot something, come home, edit it, post it, and I just was going. And now I think that I have much more free time to create. I'm more willing to like stop my editing, make a duplicate of the image, and kind of go down a totally different path than I would have before. And it kind of leads me to learning new techniques. And I think we kind of need to give ourselves permission to do things that are weird and see how it goes. And you don't have to show anyone. You don't have to share it. You don't have to, save it even. Just see what happens when you push these buttons, and see what happens when you try these things, because you never know, it could turn out kind of cool. So now that we have this weird swooshy blur thing, what we can do is we can just lower the opacity of it, bring it over, and kind of just create, it's almost like not a double exposure, but it's just sort of like this weird ghosty swoosh, we'll call it. And we can just play around with the opacity of it. You could also play around with the blending mode of it and just see how it looks. I think that looks a little bit better. And then just using a layer mask, so just that circle inside the box, using a black soft brush, we can get rid of the edges there. And it just creates like a cool ghosted effect. So now instead of it just being kind of plain, we have a little bit of light on the bottom and this kind of swirled ghost effect, which almost makes it feel like that mug is actually kind of haunted by the ghosts of coffee past, which feels a little bit more interesting. And I think that's another way that you can add some interest, is by adding motion and movement. And it's usually pretty quick when your computer is moving faster than mine. So I'm going to close these images.
Yeah, your computer's definitely shouting at you just now, because your camera's lagging a little bit now because you're making it do stuff. While you're closing them down, people are posting some comments and questions. Please keep the questions coming, because I'm going to inundate him with questions hopefully at the end once he's finished.
I'll do one more really quick.
Oh, there's no rush. I'm not going anywhere, but I don't think anybody else is. So I just want people to know I do see their questions. But I do want to mention before you move on something Sarah said there, which you said, she says, permission to explore is so amazing. We all need it to do it more. And I think what she means is exploring the tools, the stories, but especially when it comes to the tools in Photoshop. A lot of people think, Joel is amazing at Photoshop. He knows exactly what that blend layer is going to do and chooses the right blend mode every time. But a lot of it is experimenting and exploring within the program, right?
Yeah, of course. Like, there's more times than not that I end up clicking through things just to see how it looks, or I'll add layers with different colors just to see what it looks. Sometimes I can predict what something might look like, but when it comes down to especially color toning and how colors are going to interact with each other, I might have 5 copies of the same image that I'm working with because I can't figure out which one is the right one or which one looks the best, and that's totally fine. I don't think any artist, if you talk to painters from 500 years ago, I think that you wouldn't find painters that just know exactly, I need to use exactly these colors and it goes exactly this way. Of course, they're going to paint tests and they're going to try things and they're going to learn, okay, that doesn't look so great with this and this technique doesn't look so good here. And I think I was talking about it earlier with someone, is that we live in a world right now that is so focused on instant gratification and instant satisfaction. And we also live in a really content-hungry world where we feel like we have to produce in order to stay relevant, or we have to produce in order to stay interesting, or the people will forget us if we don't post all the time. And that leads us to kind of stop making risks and stop making, discoveries about ourselves, because we're chasing after, I have a deadline. But artists don't have to produce things on a deadline. And there's been so many times when I've had an image that I really want to share, but it's taking a lot longer than I want to get it to where it needs to be. And I kind of wrestle with myself, like I could just post it now and I'd be okay with it, but I really want to share it when I feel really great about it. And I think we have to kind of ignore the kind of feeling that we have to share things all the time right away in order to stay relevant, and just focus on creating things that we're really, really happy with.
Yeah, and something I'd like to bring up is we talk about, the great masters of the past not getting it right, not knowing exactly what tool they wanted to use. The best example is how many times have you heard about people stripping back paintings and finding these amazing paintings behind them of the steps that a great artist took to get to that final image, or even a completely different image where they actually changed the entire image halfway through, and that's what we're doing with layers in Photoshop. And we don't always know what the right tool is or what the right blending mode is. And I know when I first started in Photoshop, I would go to seminars and workshops, and someone would say, "Oh, and you choose the lighting blending mode." Like, how did they know that? How did they know that was the one they wanted? They didn't. They just discovered it as they were doing it.
Of course.
Some people are that clever, but most of us are playing and exploring.
I think what intimidates some people about Photoshop is that it looks very, scientific. It looks quite boxy and it looks quite intimidating. And I get that question a lot from people that are just starting. It's like, I'm intimidated. I open it up and there's all these buttons and there's all these things and I don't know what does what. And I think that's fine. If I was to walk into any sort of situation where I'd never done something before, I would be totally intimidated. But it's just trying one thing at a time and understanding where that goes. And, maybe it takes you 2 weeks to really understand what all those blending modes do and how they interact with each other. And you kind of learn to pick up those tools as you go. And I think that we do get dismayed by, seeing so many amazing images all the time. We think, I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to learn those things. But everyone started somewhere. Everyone started from the beginning. And some people are just lucky that they can pick up stuff right away, and they have the time, or they have the resources, or they have the energy. And some people take a little bit longer. But it's just going down to just trial and error and playing and just enjoying what you're doing without feeling that you have to be at a specific end or a specific result at the end of it. I'll share one more kind of thing that I like to do. One thing that I started to play around a little bit more is kind of replacing skies. And I used to do it quite a lot in Photoshop when I first started. And it was a bit of a go around trying to figure out how to do it and try to make it look right. And I know now that I was doing it the wrong way. So a really simple way to replace skies is to do this. So here's an image I had last year from a trip to Italy. And I like the lighthouse and the boat and stuff, but the sky is a little bit boring. So all you have to do is you just have to create a duplicate of your image. So just right click and duplicate that layer. And for the sake of this image, I'm just going to pretend like I'm opening up a new sky layer. So you might have an image of a more interesting sky. So this is from the same day, just from a different part of the island that we were on. It's a much more interesting sky than that. But I want to put this sky onto here. So you could try and use blending modes. So you could just try and plop it on there. But you can see as I cycle through that it doesn't really look that great when I do that. It doesn't look very real. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to drag that sky so it's in the middle. It's like a sky sandwich. So you have the filling, the sky in the middle, and you have your background in between or on the outsides. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to just use the magic wand or whatever selection tool you find most comfortable. I hate when people get really uppity about like, this is the only tool that you should use to use this. Like, the great thing about Photoshop is it's sort of like, playing the drums. I'm sure that there's a lot of ways that people play the drums that are different, and what works for them, what's more comfortable for them, and what feels great and what is easier for them. Do whatever is easiest for you in Photoshop. Don't listen to what other people tell you is the only way. So you can use the pen tool, you can use the magic wand tool, you can use the quick selection tool. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, as long as you get to where you want to go. So all I'm doing is selecting where the sky is. In this case, it's pretty simple because it's pretty uniform color. So I select that, and then I'm just going to fill it with white. And again, you can use your paint bucket tool. You can paint it in, whatever you like to do, that's great. So I'm just going to make sure that that whole sky is white. I'm actually just going to use the paintbrush tool because it's a bit faster. So once you have like a white sky, we're just going to double click on that top layer, and this window is going to pop up. And down here at the bottom, it says blend if gray. And that's what we really want to play with here. So you'll see that there's these two sliders on the top, and it looks like a little arrow, but it actually can be broken in half. And so if you hold the Alt key and you take the left hand of that arrow, like you're ripping it in half, and drag it to the left, you can see right away that it's actually separating, and it's helping that background layer show through only where it's white. So only where that sky layer was. Now all we have to do is use that layer mask again on our sky layer. And we can just, if we feel like we need to touch up any parts where the sky has maybe come through a little bit, we can just touch that up. One thing that I always think is important if you are replacing a sky is to add a really soft gradient. So it's this tool right here on the layer mask from black to white. Start at the bottom, holding the shift key and just dragging it up. It's just going to create a really soft kind of organic blend, because in real life, as the sky goes down to the horizon, it does sort of go white. It does sort of go kind of more hazy, and it loses a lot of the detail. And then we can go in and just use our regular old Gaussian blur and just find kind of a realistic level of blur for that sky. So it's a really quick and easy way to replace that sky. And once you do that one time, you can drop in any sky that you want. So if you have a library of different skies, you can go through and cycle through all the different sky options that you have to find one that really works best for you. So we can drop in this one if we wanted to. As long as it's in, whoops, that's not a sky, that's a tree. So as long as it's in between that little sandwich of the background layers, it'll just kind of show you what the sky is going to look like. And I find that this really helps because I tend to shoot my skies. I don't use filters on my lenses or anything, and my skies tend to be really overblown or really blown out. Mm-hmm. And this kind of helps me save them when I need to. But again, it's just playing around and figuring out which effect works best for you. But it's a really easy way that you can replace the skies in Photoshop if you need to.
That's a great tip. Wasn't expecting sky replacement today. I was expecting ladders and coffee cups and crazy squirrels and big fries and frogs and frogs. Yeah, sky replacement. That's awesome. Let's a couple of comments here. Sarah came back saying that she loves that. When you look at an old painting, the chunky layers are amazing because there's so much hidden underneath. And I guess with photography, you don't know just how much is hidden underneath nowadays because it's not chunky, but it's cool.
No, definitely.
There was a question I wanted to go back to that Connor posted. Connor asks, do you storyboard your photos beforehand so you can get the right proportions and angles, or do you sometimes just have some random photos and see what comes from it, or both?
I think I'm a mixture of both. So there's like two halves of my creativity, and one is hyper organized. So I've got like a notebook here that's full of like drawings and full of mind maps. I'm a huge mind map fan, so I sort of just dump my brain out onto pages because I'll forget it if I don't. And so that half of my brain is like super organized, where I know exactly where I want to shoot it. I know exactly what I need to bring with me. I know exactly what lenses I need. I know exactly what angle I need. I know everything. And when I shoot those images, it feels much more of like a puzzle being put together. So I have the finished idea. I'm just piecing the puzzle together. So I'm, shooting it at the angle I know I need to do. I know the routine. It's like a choreographed dance to try and get it all together. And then at the end, it kind of pieces together. And I feel like those images are some of my favorite ones because I have the visual and it's like a game to try and match it together. But then the other half of my brain is like spontaneous and like, let's just make something. And sometimes when I'm feeling particularly like creatively uninspired, I'll just fill my backpack with like the most random stuff I can find, which in my collection of things is a pretty random list. So I'll just put like, a teapot and light bulbs and paper boats and, keys and whatever I can in my backpack and just go somewhere and just start to see what happens. And like, let's see what it looks like if I do this, and, what story could I tell using this? And it's like a little bit more of an organic way of creating because it's less produced, it's less like thought out, it's more like spontaneous.
Yep.
And that can be really fun as well too, because I think you then realize you rely more on your environment and you rely more on your own knowledge of your camera and what you have and the lighting and the environment that you're in. And I like both of that. I like doing both of those. And I think now I have my own stock library of like tons of random things. So even if it gets down to it, and if I'm, sick, or if I'm at home in Canada and it's -30 and there's no way I'm going outside to photograph anything, I have like a library of images that I can like piece things together and build something on my own, which is nice as well. So I always advise people like photograph everything. Take pictures of everything. You never know when you're going to need it.
There's no excuse not to now with digital,
exactly.
right? It doesn't cost us anything. So
exactly.
We spoke about elements and adding things and buying little ladders from IKEA and carrying teapots and all that kind of stuff. What about you though? How do you photograph yourself? I mean, we've saw images of you sitting on things, crouching on things, kneeling under things. So do you have a library of lots of Joel poses?
I feel like I have to put them in a folder that says like delete when I die. Because some of them are pretty, I delete the bad ones because I'm like, no one ever needs to see these. Some of them are really funny because out of context, they look like I'm an absolute crazy person. Because sometimes the angles you have to stand at or like do, it just looks very odd. But yeah, I think when I first started, I relied on like the 10-second timer. So there was a lot of 10-second timing, like timer dashes where I was like sprinting across a field, like, can I make it? Can I make it? And like sometimes I would slip and fall or I wouldn't make it and like have all these really awkward photos of me like in mid-run, like trying to make it somewhere. And then I invested in a remote control, which was a game changer. That helped, but then, it doesn't quite reach. So you get a lot of pictures of you frowning at the camera holding this little device. And then now, of course, with technology, we have everything on our phone. So now my phone is a remote control. It makes it a whole lot easier because I can actually see what I'm doing.
Wi-Fi or Bluetooth.
Yeah, so having the technology definitely helps. And I think it's interesting because I've talked to people at workshops or places that I've met other photographers, and they just say like, oh, I can't photograph myself because I don't want to look at who I am because I'm embarrassed or I don't like the way I look. And it's like, I don't particularly enjoy looking at myself either. If I had the choice, I would love to shoot with a model whenever I wanted to create something, but I don't have that luxury of being around people all the time to create with. And I think one really great thing is that you start to understand more about yourself and you start to notice things about yourself and you start to see yourself. And I think it's a good challenge for anyone to take photos of yourself. And I remember kind of early on in one of those 365 projects, I was in a group that was like they would do like creative face paint or like things with your face. And one of them was like this rainbow thing, and I had taken face paint and I just sort of like smeared it on my face like in a handprint, and I was editing it and I was looking at my face like life size to life size, and I was looking like really intently and not even thinking about the fact that it was my face. And then I kind of sat back and I realized like I don't actually remember the last time I looked at myself that closely, and probably the last time I did might have been when I was an early teenager. And like I started to think like I'm looking at myself in the face and like I don't recognize myself. I didn't notice that I had like those flecks of color, and you start to notice things about yourself, which I think is always a good thing, and it's a good way to kind of be more comfortable with who you are as well.
Yeah, I'm going to get you to stop sharing your screen so that we'll give some bandwidth back to your main camera, so we can all stare at your face the way we're meant to stare at it.
I think I stopped it.
Yeah, it's cool. It's the system gives a little bit more bandwidth to the share screen because it knows we're working in detail and stuff. That's cool. I Create Life says, so inspired by your process and consistency of your photography. You do create a lot. How many images do you reckon you create in a month? It's got to be,
in a month it's probably like, I would say like maybe now probably like 10 maybe on a good month. Because I help run these creative communities. I really like to be involved and engaged in them. And I think the best way to lead creativity, especially creative communities, is to lead by example and to do what you're asking people to do. So I try to, create as much as I can along with the people that I'm creating with. And I really get inspired by things that are going on around me. And I think that it's like riding a bike. It's like once you get on the bike, you don't necessarily want to stop. You just want to keep going. And I find it hard to get back into the swing of it when I take a break, or when sometimes, as you know, when you're traveling, you kind of lose control of like what you want to do, and you kind of have all these obligations. And when I get the chance to sit back down again, it's like, oh, I forget what I like to do, and it feels so unnatural now. And I like to create, so it's something I enjoy doing.
Yeah. Okay. Curious question. Obviously, you're mid-travel at the moment, extended travel at the moment. What are you editing on? Are you editing on the machine you would typically edit on, or do you have a studio at home with a main computer?
So for a long time, I was editing just with whatever I had, because I was traveling so much. And I've always used PC, so I'm using a PC right now and editing tablet. And last year, I was really lucky to work with Microsoft on a project with the Studio Surface, which is like editing on a big screen TV. It's like, it was like a dream. Like when I first used it, I was just like, oh my God, I could just like never let go of this. And unfortunately, it's too big to carry with you. It's like 100 pounds. So it's safe, tucked away in a box in Canada and waiting for me to get back. And I love editing with it. But it comes down to, I get asked a lot. And I think anyone that's a photographer or an artist gets asked about their tools a lot. And people ask, like, what camera should I buy? What lens should I buy? Like, what computer should I buy? And it's use whatever you have available to you. And you don't have to spend a ton of money in order to create really great work. Some of the work that I started off sharing on Flickr years ago that ended up being, sold for book covers or used as advertising or other things were shot on a camera I paid $100 for. And you don't have to spend a ton of money. Now people are doing incredible things with their phones, and it's like their phone is just sitting in their hand, and now they're creating epic work. And even when it comes down to editing tablets, like I have this tiny little editing tablet, and it's probably the cheapest one that they make, and it does the same thing that I would need, one that's 10 times the price to do. And you don't need to spend a lot of money to be good at something.
I asked that because I know people are curious, but I did ask it as a kind of leading question because I know the tools aren't that important. But when people travel, weight and stuff is and space is important. So I knew you didn't have your Surface with
my usual,
and it's interesting. My daughter is the creative one of my two kids, and for her birthday we bought her a new iPad with the pencil. And oh my goodness, the things she can do with just that, and
I mean, that's
Procreate
something I do enjoy. I have a collaboration coming out with Adobe either today or tomorrow, and it's actually my first kind of request or first job where I had to illustrate something, so draw something. And I was like, oh my God. And I used my iPad and the pencil to do it. And I was like, this is actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Like,
is it a big frog?
There's no frog in it, unfortunately, no.
But it's amazing what people can do, just sitting with an app on your phone. And I know even editing images, I'm a huge fan of Snapseed and some of these other things that you can have on your phone just for editing on the fly and quick, and the results are incredible. So the tools are not important. Obviously, it's nice to have nice tools, and they do assist you, but there's so many opportunities we have now to do incredible work. We're way over the hour. Well, not quite, but it's been a lot of fun. We haven't even started talking about bread yet.
I know.
Because you have this, you've fallen in love with making bread.
It was a couple of years ago, actually, and it sort of falls in line of like wanting to try new things and wanting to get better at things. So I wanted to improve my like food photography just as like a background hobby. Like, okay, I can't always, do things in Photoshop, and maybe I can practice other things. So I was trying to learn food photography, and I was like, the best way to learn food photography is to have food around you.
Absolutely.
And the best way to have food around you is to learn how to cook. And I can cook, but I was new to the world of baking, and it's become my passion and kind of obsession over the past couple of years. And yeah, I just love it. I love eating. And so I love to make things that I like to eat. And now I'm starting to get more confident in making it look really pretty and look really interesting as well. So,
well, the one you baked yesterday was probably one of the prettiest pieces of bread
it was
I've
pretty
ever seen in my
tasty.
life.
It was pretty good, yeah.
You know how much you're killing us all though by these amazing, bakes you're doing, and none of us can get near
I
you
know,
to try
it's
it.
actually dangerous because like when you're in lockdown and you're practicing your baking, there's only one way it can go, and it's straight into my mouth. So
Yeah.
having to run a lot as
Day,
well.
day eating and day drinking has become the new thing.
Eating a lot of carbs lately.
Absolutely,
A
absolutely.
lot of carbs.
I find myself, I need an excuse to get away from this desk,
Mm.
and inevitably that is a trip to the fridge.
Yep.
So
I think like I was talking to someone about it the other day actually about getting involved in baking and something like that, and I talked to a friend a few years ago, and it was interesting because he was telling me, I was like, what do you do like after work? And he was like, I watch TV. And I was like, what else? And he was like, that's it. And I was like, you don't have any hobbies? And he was like, no. And then the more people I talked to, I was like, you don't have any hobbies either? And like I realized how important it is to have
absolutely.
hobbies. And the great thing is like community exists around anything. And I think that's what I learned quite early on with Flickr is like there's a community for any type of thing that you want to do. And the baking community, I thought the photography community and the creativity community was pretty kind and compassionate and supportive and excited, and the baking community is like unreal. Like they are some of the nicest people, and everyone's always more than happy to help and share what they know, and it's great. I love it. It's so wholesome. And
Yeah, we have a lot of bakers at SmugMug, a lot of bread bakers, to the point where the most important topic is sharing starters and making sure they're looking after their starters. And,
yeah, I have to feed mine today actually.
yeah, going on trips and making sure that while you're on a trip, you're feeding your starter and stuff. It
My
gets
children
pretty
well.
intense. Well, now that we're all completely hungry,
Yeah.
I think it's time we go take that little trip to the fridge or wherever we need to go to get some food.
Absolutely.
Joe, thank you so much for today. I've
thank
really
you.
appreciated it. I've been looking forward to this episode for such a long time. Thank you for giving us the time. Hopefully we get to do it in person and catch up soon.
Yeah.
But hopefully you're back in Canada before too
That's
long.
the plan.
That is the plan. And once you get back to Canada, what's next?
I haven't really thought about it. I was thinking last week that I haven't actually been home in Canada in the summertime for about 8 years. And so it's my first time home in the summer, which is a beautiful time to be in the mountains.
Absolutely.
And I think the more I think about it, the more I'm excited about going hiking and, swimming in the lakes and just being around family and just enjoying kind of being in the mountains in the summertime. So that's the plan for the first couple of months, is just to enjoy being home and enjoy seeing, the people that I love and spending time with family. And I'm lucky I live in a small town, and it's sort of that kind of a place when you walk down the street, you kind of see 10 people and I start to miss that when I travel or when I'm not in a place where I know people. So I'm looking forward to that for sure.
No, absolutely. Sounds great. Obviously, I would encourage people to go check out Joel's Flickr account and see all these images in amazing detail and beautifully rendered there on Flickr. But in the notes, I've also posted all the other places that you can find Joel's website and his social media handles. So they're all in the notes. And I would encourage people to go reach out. He is, he's a stalwart of the community. Really, reach out, join that community. Be creative, and Joel, we will see you soon. Thank you so much.
I'll see you soon. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone stays safe and stays well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would ask everybody just to do us a favor and hit that little subscribe button and that little bell icon. That way you'll be notified and find all the episodes that we have here on SmugMug Live. But for now, I'll let you get back to your day wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night. Thank you so much for your time today, and a huge thank you to Joel. And we will see you back here on the next episode of SmugMug Live. Thank you. Bye.